The word cancer, it's loaded. When we first hear that word, all sorts of images pop into our mind. Our emotions start racing, and we start thinking differently about the future. My guest today, Mike Knebel, he has dealt with cancer and recovery, and then cancer again, and then recovery again. In this episode, he shares his story from first being diagnosed with cancer to the role his faith plays, his humor, talking with his wife and his kids about his diagnosis, all the way through the recovery process and how he's doing today. Mike Knebel, he's a husband, a father, a Christ follower, a self-described bourbon expert, and a thrice-failed political candidate who is still a reluctant Husker fan. As a man who finds power in humor, he likes to share that he gave his left nut to get his first book published. You can get his book, Nut Up or Shut Up, on Amazon right now. It's an important episode that every man needs to listen to. So let's get started. Hey, Mike, thanks for being here today. We've got a really important topic, and we're going to have a fun conversation about it.
Well, thanks for having me, Warren. And yeah, just for your audience's sake, I just want to put this disclaimer out there. The word testicle will be said quite a bit, but I
Yep.
assure you it will be for a purpose and not just for the shock value of the word.
Yep. So we're going to start right there. We're talking about cancer. We're talking about facing cancer, dealing with cancer, some of the stuff that you learned, your story, your journey along the way. So what I'd love to begin with is just the beginning of your story of this. You know, how did you find out that you had cancer? And just we'll start there. What was the very beginning of this journey for you?
Well, certainly. And so when it comes to cancer, testicular cancer, usually it's something that affects guys between the ages of 18 and 35. And myself, when I got diagnosed, I was 41 at the time. So, just a little outside of that range. And it's not something that you expect to find, but just for everybody out there, for all the guys, it is something that from age 11 to well into your 50s, you can still be diagnosed with it. But as far as my story is concerned, it really started back in 2022, around the beginning of the summer of 2022. So that whole start of the year, I had been training. Well, let me back up. Training for a half marathon, which for me consisted primarily of carb loading and doing a lot of short runs. So I wasn't training as extensively as you probably should for a half marathon. But over the course of the few months from say like February through May, I started to have like just some minor issues going on, just some fatigue, just some different things showing up in the blood work. And the doctors were kind of checking a few things, and nothing was hitting at that point. There were no tumor markers. There was nothing in the blood work that was hitting at that point. And a lot of it was just coming back as, well, you're in your 40s and you're trying to run a half marathon. So understand your body is going to have not the best response to some of this stuff if this is your first time doing it.
Mhm.
Uh, After I ran the marathon, and it was about a week after in May, I started noticing some very intense pain down in that area. It was to the point where I thought I had maybe had some sort of torsion or maybe had torn something while running. And so I didn't think much about it. I was just like, great, this is why you don't do marathons, because
Yeah.
this is going to happen.
Yeah. Marathons hurt. Don't do them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I did joke for a little bit after that the marathon gave me cancer, but there's no scientific evidence on that.
Yeah.
So I did a self-examination, and it was something that felt very unusual. So it for you guys out there, when you're doing a self-examination, when something is off, when something doesn't feel right. And that's kind of what I talk about in the first chapter of the book is, how do you know? Well, the consistency of what you're feeling down there, it may feel like you've got an entirely different testicle. Like there's going to be things where it's just like it's kind of like a marble almost. And I was still thinking, I injured myself. This isn't right. But in the back of my head, I was like, I hope it's not cancer, being a
Yeah.
bit of a hypochondriac. So went through the summer and we did a couple of additional blood tests and nothing was coming back. And I just kind of put it off. I said, it'll heal, it'll get better. Um, but I would still do the regular self-examinations. And so when it got to the end of June and there was still no change, I said, okay, this is something I probably should get checked out. Set up the appointment with my primary care physician. We did regular checkup, and he goes, "Oh, it's fluid. It's probably nothing, but we'll do an ultrasound just to make sure." And go in a few weeks later, do an ultrasound, and that is where they confirmed that there is a mass consistent with malignancy. So the terms that they use. And from there, it is anyone can tell you time seems to move differently after that point once you see the word malignancy and all the different specialists start coming in and things start moving pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
from that moment it was like, here's a urologist, here's okay, here's another appointment, here is your surgery, we're going to schedule this for as soon as possible. It's like just boom 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 boom.
Yeah.
um but the urologist said, one of the things that was really helpful and beneficial was the fact that I came in and was seen by him 3 months after finding something. This has been a big push of mine with both this book that I've written, Nut Up or Shut Up, and just doing things like this, talking with you, Warren, talking with other individuals, is pushing for early detection, because he said the fact that I came in at 3 months was something that helped to ensure that this hadn't spread to different sections of lymph nodes, to the lungs, to all these other things at this stage. Most men, when they find a lump, when they're doing a self-examination, it's 6 to 9 months before they come in. And depending on the type of cancer that you have, it if it's a seminoma, that's the slower growing one. Um, you might not have too much of a spread, but if it's one that is a non-seminoma, or there's a couple of different rarer types, those things can spread quite a bit. And I know that you and I both know an individual, Andy Storch, who had testicular cancer, and his had spread through a lot of his body by the time that he had found it. So early detection, coming in as soon as possible and ignoring that little nagging voice that says, it's probably nothing. Even so, get it checked out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing all that. It's good to give us context of, kind of where this all began for you. And I did want to ask you on that. So I'm glad you mentioned that you got your diagnosis pretty fast. 3 months is pretty quick, and that 6 to 9 month range, a lot can change in that time. When you get 9 months out, you're three times, greater, or three times more time there. You also note that the survival rate with early diagnosis is 95%. So I'm curious for you personally, as you started to do your reading, as you started to do your researching on all of this, and you were on the early side, the statistics and the percentages can be good and bad when we see those things because of the way we process them. I'm curious for you personally, did you say, okay, that's good, we got it, I'm probably in the 95, or did your brain say, man, what if I'm in the 5? Like how were you processing just statistics, the odds and all of that sort of in the earlier part of this whole process for you?
So this is also something I discuss a bit in the book, is the mental aspect of all of this, because a lot of the time I was thinking, hey, I'm in the 95%, but you do get into those moments. And part of this is because my wife is a nurse. She's been a nurse for many, many years. And a lot of times she was a rehab nurse. So she would see things that, had gone well, but also things that had gone wrong with surgeries or with treatments, and, the outliers of,
Mhm.
what could happen. So you're always aware that 2%, 5% that there's still a chance that you fall into that. And I would get worried. I spent a whole lot of time in prayer to make sure that, I was having that mindset of, I'm going to be in this 95%, but even if I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay. Even if they find this in all these other areas, God will show up, and God is here. And I did a lot of reading in Job to kind of help with the mindset. Um, because as you are well aware in Job, it's that ending part where God's finally like, okay, let me have a chance to speak. Were
Yeah.
you there at the beginning of all of this?
Right.
Were you able to see all, like, and it's just one of those reminders that I I can't see all of the plan. And so yeah, absolutely I got worried about being in the 5% every so often, but I really worked hard not to stay in that position.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned Job there. I know in your book you also talk a little bit about Ecclesiastes, one of my favorite books in the Bible, and you discuss your faith and how your faith played a part in this whole journey. So share a bit about that. You touched on it already a little bit, but what was the role that faith played for you as you were working through this whole thing?
Well, I think had this happened earlier in my life, before marriage, or definitely before everything that we saw happen in 2020 with COVID, I think faith would have played a little bit of a different role. But just in seeing all the craziness over the last handful of years,
Yeah.
the one thing that was consistent and the one thing that was always there, even more so at that point, was the Lord. And he is always there. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, does not change. So it was something that I was able to really just lean on him because I had no other option. And there was one thing in the book that I do is I honor an acquaintance, an old kind of family friend. He that lost his life to cancer back in 2019. Um, his name is Tim, and he was somebody who got diagnosed with like this really aggressive, rare form of cancer, and within 6 months had passed. Father of four, longtime marriage. But throughout all of that, he was sharing, everything about being a dad, sharing everything, about following the Lord, you know, losing all of his senses and not being able to move at the very end, all of these things, but still being like, and still, I worship the Lord. Like I share one of his posts in the book that just absolutely will stick with me through everything. And so it was one of those things where you see people go through incredible hardships and they say, I'm still with the Lord. I am still walking with him. I am still trusting him. If he heals, fantastic. He is the great physician. He can heal. Right. If he doesn't heal, I still trust him because there is a much larger plan here at work.
Yeah. 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 And remembering that plan, keeping our eyes on that plan, that's sometimes that's one of the hardest things we have to do, because we look at all the trouble around us, we look at the trouble that we're dealing with. Maybe there's stuff in our families, just in the world. We look at all of that, and you're right, we can't see the big picture. We don't have the perspective on that to visualize all of that. But remembering him, trusting in him, yeah, that's so powerful as we go through our lives. I want to go back. You mentioned your wife briefly. So I'm sure we'll chat a bit more about her and the role that she played in your recovery and things like that. But what was that first conversation like with her when you got the news and you were talking through this with her? What was that like?
So leading up to the conversation, I will say that going through the earlier part of the year and just with all the tests and everything that I had been going through and the different ailments that I had been describing, but nothing was showing up. My wife was kind of getting to the point of going, it's probably nothing. You're 41. So as we were waiting for the call after the ultrasound, um, she was like, I'm going to be here by your side no matter what. She's like, if it is, we've got this. But let's just not go down that path yet until we know for sure. Um, Despite my hypochondriac ways, she was still very supportive of everything. And when the call finally came in and they said, malignancy, and, we're going to be talking about getting set up with a urologist the following week. That was the other thing, is the call came in on a Friday and it was, okay, we're going to set you up with an appointment next week to start talking about your next options. So, when the call came in, I just remember her being very supportive and saying like, we're going to get this early, but also just having an entire weekend to just sit and go, I have no idea what's next.
Yeah.
And just being incredibly thankful that she was there and with her resources talking to her friends in oncology and other areas saying like, okay, this is what we should do. This is how we should proceed. Just getting all sorts of different helpful tips and things to go through.
Yeah. 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 That's so powerful because I can't, it's hard to try to even imagine how would you process, something like that. So you guys being on the same team is huge. Having someone to go through like that, having your family to go through this with you. And on the family side, you have kids.
Mm-hmm.
What was that part of it like? You had to decide, well, what do we tell them? What do we not tell them? How much do we tell them? How did that come about with what you were going to share with your children and how to decide what to share with them?
Well, that was a little bit of a daunting situation. One, because with it being testicular cancer, it's always just kind of weird to talk. This is one thing with the book and with doing all this is trying to overcome my own stigma and talking of saying the word testicle, but having it like be a legitimate reason to say that. But when you're talking about, testicular cancer, especially, it's like, how do you talk to kids who aren't even teenagers yet and say, this is what's happening? To, add on to that, they would remember all the times we prayed for Tim the year before to be healed from cancer, and he passed. My father-in-law, they were going to find out shortly thereafter that my father-in-law had prostate cancer. And, they were also going to find out around the same time that my own father was going to have heart surgery. So to say, oh, by the way, dad's also got cancer, is there's no great way to add on to that when everything else is going on. Because
right.
When you have cancer, the world still goes. No matter what type of cancer is, the world's still moving on. Things are going to happen. And so you can't just stop everything. So when we talked to the kids, it was, all right, there is a little bit of a tumor. It's in like the lower part of dad's abdomen. But we've got it early. They're going to do surgery. They're going to be able to, remove this, and they're going to be able to, really take care of everything here. So it was really about making sure that they weren't scared or anything like that. Speaking of, my son just is stopping over to say hi. You can just wave real quick. Just say
Hi.
you woke up. One of the things about, as you know, working from home and doing podcasts at home and everything is there's no like barrier between any of that. But it was really just about being as honest with them but not getting too in the weeds about the science of it. Just saying, there's this
Mhm.
tumor, we're going to take care of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great doctors here. Dad's going to be okay. We'll just keep
Yeah.
praying.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great way to go. Cause I imagine that for a lot of men, as they're listening to this, they might be thinking, how would I do that? How would I process this information? How would I share this with my wife? How would I share this with my kids? What would I say? How is my faith going to impact this? And um, another sort of personality trait, if you will, that I love that comes out in your book and is a key element of all of this is the humor aspect. Um, how how about that? Why was humor such a big deal then? Why is humor so important to you as you're just going through this process? Even titling the book, right? Nut up or shut up, right? There's humor inside that, so tell, yeah, what role did humor play for you in this whole process?
Um, so yeah, even the title was something that was jokingly given to me by a friend who I give a little bit of a shout out to in the book. But it's something that I say in the book, testicular cancer is equal parts serious and humorous because it's, growing up as a guy, what's, one of the things that always gets joked about, it's that area in a whole different way. So I think it's also a little bit of gallows humor. As I got more involved with this organization called the Testicular Cancer Foundation, and I've just done some calls and some Discord chats with a lot of these guys who've already gone through different types of it. Is we all have a humor about it. Whether or not it's a cancer that caused you to lose one testicle or caused you to lose both of them, and the adjustments to life after all of that, it's what can you do? Can you be sullen and angry and sad about this whole thing the rest of your life? Like, no, I mean you could, but what benefit is that going to do? So sometimes in life you've got to just absolutely laugh at certain things, find the humor in certain things. And to a lot of my friends' credit, they definitely showed up. There was I talked about in the book one of my friends bringing a bag of candy to me after my first surgery, and it was about a bag of Mounds and a bag of Almond Joys because sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was one of those things. Just I hope the humor shines through in it, but it's always just meant to, I think, kind of lessen the sharpness of it, and your body is going to be permanently changed. But I don't know. Sometimes it's funny. Like I even put on the back cover in my bio. Now it says, "I gave my left nut to get this book published. I'd be honored
Right.
if you read it."
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great. Like what choice do you have? Right. Like you can't stop this from occurring. And so choose to smile. It doesn't mean things are happy and we're all glad this is taking place, but it just makes life better when you choose to go through it with that kind of an attitude. It's definitely commendable. That's the way to go from my view. Um, you mentioned in there briefly the first surgery, just as you
Mhm.
in passing there. So that implies there was a second surgery. So we need to hit a little bit of recovery. So you had your surgery, then you had a recovery period. So tell us a little bit about recovery before we move on to second surgery.
Certainly. So with a lot of with as far as I know, I'm aware, most cancers, it's that first 12 months after, finding it and treatment, that's when you're at your highest risk of recurrence. And so the recovery period from September of 2022 all the way through the summer of 2023, it was regular surveillance for me. It was the CT scans, the blood work, all of these other checkups. It was kind of changing up my own health patterns and everything, and just keeping on track of it all, and developing relationship with the oncologist. I think that was also key because he was able to sit and have conversations with me at each checkup, answer all these questions, uh, go over a plan thoroughly. And as far as I was aware, recovery was going great. The thing with CT scans is that you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff going on in your body that you didn't know was there before. And it was equal parts great and horrifying for anyone who might get a little bit worried about, oh, am I the worst thing that can happen to somebody who's been a hypochondriac earlier in life is to actually get cancer because you're like, see, I was right. And now anything that showed up in those CT scans, whether it was like this little nodule in my lung or something going on in the spleen, it was like, okay, is this going to be the next thing that's going to require me to get surgery?
Yeah.
So there was always this nervousness every few months when it came to the follow up with the oncologist. It's like, what is the scan going to find? What is the blood work going to find? And it was in the summer of 2023 that they had been tracking a couple of the lymph nodes in my abdomen. So testicular cancer is very well documented. It's probably one of the more well documented cancers that there is. So they know how it performs and they know where it goes. Once it leaves, the groin region, it will get into the lymph nodes. And usually if it goes to the lymph nodes, it's going to be in the lower abdomen part, sort of back by the spine and the aorta around that area. And then from there, you'll usually see something in the lungs, which is why they were monitoring this one lung nodule. And then from there, once it's really taken hold in the lymphatic system, it can go pretty much anywhere. So when they started noticing a couple of these little lymph nodes that were growing just a little bit, they were monitoring it and they ordered a PET scan. I go into the book in much greater detail about the CTs and the PETs and why you would get certain things and what they would show. But the PET scan showed that these two lymph nodes reacted very highly, which they're like, okay, this is a sign of malignancy, and we've really got to address this because it's already at your lymphatic system. So with that, the one difference that I found was the timing. With the first instance of the cancer, once they found it in the ultrasound, they're like, let's get the surgery done next week. I was like, can we push it out 2 weeks? And they said, yes, but the sooner the better. So it was 2 weeks from finding to surgery. It was like that quick. This one, the PET scan finds it and they go, we're going to meet with we're going to have a tumor board meet. We're going to discuss the plan. We'll come back in probably about a week and a half, let you know. And it ended up being a surgery for me scheduled roughly 2 months after that. So it was, they felt that there was much more time to work because it was such a slow growing tumor in the lymph nodes.
Yeah. And that surgery was a different kind of surgery. You write in the book what that surgery was like with the robot.
Mm-hmm.
That's my word. I can't remember you used robot. I remember you talked about it sort of like half a surgeon, half a video game, and that kind of thing. So, what was that surgery like, and what was recovery like from the second surgery?
Well, so the second procedure is RP-LND. Really long name, but essentially what it means is they go in and they remove a pretty large section of lymph nodes from like the periaortic area. So they're having to maneuver through all of and around all these internal organs, get back close to the spine and the aorta, and just kind of shave off a lot of these lymph nodes. I had the robotic version, which cuts down on the recovery time and the hospitalization. But the majority of guys that I've talked with at the foundation and through other groups, they were not able to have the robotic. I guess it's not a common procedure. So if you don't have the robotic procedure, you're basically cut from here all the way down. And if you've the way that I kind of was described to me is like if you've seen Braveheart, like they're taking out little parts of your internal organs, moving them to the side, and then getting to the lymph nodes. With the robotic one, it's 1 to 2 days stay in the hospital. With the regular surgery, it's, you're probably in the hospital for about a week, and it's a bit longer of a recovery
Yeah.
time because of that giant slice. But for me, it was 1.5 days in the hospital. Came home. There were some complications post surgery, but it was, I'd say, about a good month before I was able to really move around, because even though it's very precise, you have all these different robotic arms that are moving around and attacking different things inside your body. And so there's still going to be swelling and fluid and scar
Yeah.
tissue and all of this, and just a whole mess of pain anytime you have an abdominal surgery.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, of course. I had gallbladder surgery, and even that, which is extraordinarily minor compared to what you're talking about, and even that, you're like, man, my whole insides feel weird. All my guts feel weird. So you did mention your wife earlier, and
Mhm.
in your book you share some of these details as well. Of she's a nurse, and she has experience with recovery and so on. Um, tell us a bit about you guys as a team and her experience as a nurse, but also more so than that, because most people listening, their wives are not nurses. So more than that, though, the support of her, you guys being a team, going through this together, what did all that mean to you?
Well, from early on in our marriage, we would always just talk about how it's you and me, babe. Like that's the thing that we would say. And it has been an incredible blessing to have her on my side, have her um, be there to be supportive, and to take care of me in the sickness part of the marriage. I think we've provided a great partnership when it comes to helping each other. There was a period of time about 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, where she had slipped and fell on a stair and ended up fracturing one of her vertebrae. So she was kind of laid up with a broken back for a couple of months. And, so we've each had this opportunity to be there for the other one, and to just have her continually be by my side and be supportive and be like, hey, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna do this. Um, I could not have imagined a better person to do all of this with. So I'm incredibly blessed. I'm just very, very fortunate that
Yeah.
that she has been with me.
Yeah. And the flip side of having someone to go through such an experience with is the lone wolf aspect. And that is something that you write about in your book as well. You talk about why a man should not lone wolf this. That's good advice in general. I've talked about that, the lone wolf, and how that's such an issue. But as it specifically relates to somebody facing cancer, why is that a strong recommendation from you that somebody shouldn't lone wolf it through this?
So the whole reason I wrote this book was to help guys not go through this alone, because not only was I fortunate enough to have Jess by my side, but through another organization that I'm a part of, I got to know a couple of guys who had also gone through testicular cancer, 3 to 5 years prior to me going through it. And so, there, like I said, there's a guy that you and I both know, Andy Storch, who
Uh-huh.
he's an author, and he sent me a 20-page PDF that he wrote about his journey through cancer. So it dictated the testing and his diet and his health plan. And it was like, hey, this is what I did to help me along. I share in the book also a story of another man, Vasily, who pretty much did the same thing. He's like, hey, this is what I did. So this is what you kind of know how to address certain things with health. But a lot of guys, what they were providing me with on Insight was do everything possible to avoid radiation or chemo. Like if you're given all these different options, if you need to get like a second opinion on certain thing, but try as best as possible to avoid this or do these certain things with your health. So it's very important for guys to have, other men in their lives and these kind of resources and support, because you're going to have someone going, I did this and I got through this. You can too. Let me help you along on this one. You're basically lowering the ladder for somebody to help them climb up and out of this valley. And not only that, it's this way that then you can do that for somebody else once you've gone through it. It's so beneficial to have that support. My oncologist even talked about men don't have as much of a support as women do. We talked about creating a testicular cancer support group within the hospital organization here. And he goes, breast cancer has, a lot of the support, even prostate, some of these other ones, they have more of these groups and these organizations, and that is fantastic. Any organization that focuses on any type of cancer and supporting the people going through it and the families going through it, fantastic. He just said that you don't see as much with the testicular cancer. So anything that you can do to get guys talking about it, get guys doing the early detection, but also letting them know, hey, this is not a devastating thing. This is not going to ruin your life. This is not going to end your world. This is not going to even prevent you from having kids and a healthy marriage and all of these other things. So many of those stigmas about testicular cancer says, well, you're not going to be able to have the type of normal life that a man should have. It's not true at all.
Yeah. And, tied to that as well, a lot of guys are probably with all those stigmas. They're like, well, I'm no longer a man. I'm no longer masculine. I'm no longer any of those things. What are some of your thoughts on that, on guys kind of struggling with those thoughts or thinking, well, yeah, if I break my arm, that's manly. If I am fighting a bear, if they come up here into the mountains, I'm fighting a bear and I get sliced, that's manly. Testicular cancer, maybe I'm not quite so masculine anymore.
Well, so I go into a little bit of that in the book as well, and I think that there is a tendency for us to delve into a whole other area of social topics when you start talking about the removal of certain body parts like that. But for a lot of the guys that I spoke with, it was an adjustment period. Some it took longer than others, but through certain testosterone replacement therapies and certain other therapies, guys are able to have the healthy marriage. The oncologists and the urologists and everything that work with you and say, hey, there's a big chance after, like, you have a removal of one testicle, you're still going to be able to have kids, all these other things. There's not going to be really much of an issue. Maybe a little bit of a lower testosterone. You start getting into things like the removal of both, or the RPL&D, or chemo, or some of these other things. They go, okay, there are procedures that we can do to make sure that your sperm is able to be kept, so that if you and your wife want to have kids, you can do that if you're not done. There are other things that they can do to help protect that. But even if you were to lose both of your testicles in this, and talking with a couple of guys who have, they're like, it hasn't really changed after the adjustment period. They're like, there are some things that, it's maybe we think about it every so often, but one of the young guys I was talking with, he's in his early to mid 20s, and they have these implants that you can get, which I kind of joke a little bit about in the book as well.
Yeah.
So if you're concerned about appearance, he has those. He's able to have a normal relationship, things like that. So I get it. I totally get it. And I think a lot of our social aspects that we grew up with, a lot of the maybe cultural and media stuff that we consumed growing up. You and I are both relatively close in age. And so, we remember a lot of things in the 90s, and you think about a movie like Fight Club, a book and movie like Fight Club, and the way that talks about, testicular cancer support group. And you look at those guys and it's like just a whole bunch of sad sacks, just
Yeah.
completely listless. And it's like, no, it's not. It is not that at all. That does an absolute disservice. And I know, not to deconstruct that book, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in there, but you see that and you go, oh, is that what testicular cancer is?
Right.
And then you get around guys who've gone through it and guys who are living amazing lives. And you're like, no, it's just simply this thing that you go through and that you overcome. And that if it changes you, you let it change you for the better. And the guys out that I've seen go through this, they are, man, moving and doing all sorts of amazing things and inspiring things. And I, just wanted to share a little bit of that book. So it's not only my
Yeah.
story, it's some of these other guys' stories too.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the other things that you mentioned in the book in there, and you touched on this a little bit just a moment ago, and that's about excuse me, about changing health patterns. You write about changing your diet, and you write a little bit about a disagreement with your doctor on the diet when it comes to sugar. So what was that like for you? What was the importance of changing your diet, changing up some of those health patterns? What kind of impact has that had on you since then? And just talk a little bit about the diet side, the food side of this whole process for you.
Well, it was something that really got me thinking prior to the RPL&D, because when you go through a PET scan, essentially, excuse me, the the way that the PET scan will work is that they have this like radioactive sucralose, and where that seems to collect, that's where malignancy, cancer loves sugar. Basically, you listen to these different cancer podcasts, you read these books. Cancer loves sugar. It just like it needs it to feed. So I was asking a bit about, well, do I need to start lowering my sugar intake? Like, I'm a guy who loves cinnamon rolls. Do I need to start changing this up? And I change up how I wrote about it in the book a little bit. It was one of those things where, he didn't want to press and say, oh, change up your whole diet. But it was more of a comment of, well, the jury's still out on how sugar affects cancer growth and all of this stuff on these different levels. And so that did prompt me to go, okay, well, I'm going to look into this a bit more. And Jess helped me. And we started talking with, a few of the other guys who'd gone through it, and talking with friends who are in oncology, and said, okay, what do you see that helps? And I did cut out a bit of sugar. I did cut out some of my bourbon, which, as you know, I'm a guy that loves a good dram of bourbon every now and then. And I introduced some additional supplements, this thing called CMOS, which we had read about. So it was a mixture of just eating cleaner, not a lot of processed stuff. I still don't eat a lot of processed stuff unless we're coming back from the ball field and the kids want Taco Bell. Then that's the only option you have.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was cutting out processed, cutting out a bunch of sugar, and just going that route. I had to change up a little bit because when it comes to food, you're usually going to get your flavor from one or two things: sugar or fat. And after the RPL&D, when you remove a bunch of lymph nodes while they're healing, I go over this in the book, basically you have to go through a very low fat diet, which meant if I'm not having any fat, the stuff that I'm eating is much higher in sugar. So I had to switch that up for about a month, and just messed with the body a little bit. but essentially eating cleaner.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a silver bullet, and it's not like it's really anything new. You just focus on that. You focus on maybe a couple of unique things like the sea moss, and I go into it in the book a bit, as far as what happened after the RPL&D, but uh, and I think that's a really big testament to God throughout all this. But I will say, as of this moment, that I'm clean, I'm clear. That not only that, but I've only got one other checkup scheduled in December, and then it goes annual checkups. Like the oncologist like goes, this is the type of meeting, this is the type of progress that I love to see, he said.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So things are going well.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's an amazing thing to be able to share with people is that it's not automatically this sentence, and it's not automatically that everything about life is over, and it's not automatically that your marriage is over. You get the diagnosis, you work through it, and you do what you can do, right? Ultimately God is in control, but you do what you can do, and if that means change up your diet and eat a bit more clean, which we all should be doing anyway. So everybody should be listening to that advice and taking that advice. Speaking of advice, so what advice would you give to somebody who is either they're kind of right on the edge, like I think I have something going on, or maybe just got diagnosed, like they're early in this whole thing, they're early in figuring this out? What advice do you give to that guy?
So first of all, to the guy who says, I think something might be going on, go and get it checked out.
Yep.
Just ignoring it is not going to solve anything. Ignoring it is the absolute worst thing you can do. Go and get it checked out and just face that issue if that's what it ends up being. If you're early on in the situation, you're listening to this and you go, yeah, I just got diagnosed this last week. You're kind of in the thick of it at the moment, because the early diagnosis in between saying the word cancer and the orchiectomy, it's a very short time frame. So you don't have a lot to wrap your head around. Once you get past the surgery and they start talking about different treatments and therapies, I'd say find a group of guys. I've become real fond of the Testicular Cancer Foundation, the TCF. The guy Connor who started it, been a real welcoming individual, and the guys there are very helpful. Get connected, and just know that things might suck for a little while, and things are going to be different for a little while, but it's just the season. It is absolutely just the season. Get yourself around guys who have gone through it or are going through it, to walk alongside. And if you're not somebody who is strong in faith at the moment, maybe you've haven't had that type of relationship with the Lord, maybe you walked away or whatever it is, I say just open up the Bible, open up a conversation, and start looking into it again. Because without other people by my side, and definitely without, understanding and being aware of the presence of God, it would have been an entirely different scenario. I would not be here talking with you.
Yeah. Well, that in and of itself should let guys know the importance of that. People ask sometimes, how do you see evidence of God and things like that? The fact that we're having this conversation is some of that evidence. I always like to give guys an opportunity as we're wrapping up the show to come back to a point that we maybe needed to hit more, or something that you would just like to leave everybody with as a final point. So very open-ended there. What is that for you? What would you like to reinforce, or what would you like to tell everybody as we wrap up here?
I would just like to say that when it comes to your health, early detection is by far the best thing that you can do. That there is no way to prevent testicular cancer, but there is a way to get through it with, as minimally as invasive as possible. So early detection, go and get things checked out, and just listen to that nagging little thought in your head that says, this isn't right.
Yeah.
You know your body, so get it checked.
Yeah, that is great advice, especially because we're talking to men and sometimes we can be stubborn about going to doctors. So yes, go get it checked out. So if guys want to find your book, where do they go? Where's the best place to go find your book?
Certainly. So on Amazon, it's going to be Nut Up or Shut Up. It is published as of July 22nd this year. So I'm real excited. But go to Amazon. I've also started an Instagram where, and you can show the link there on the bottom, but the Instagram handle is called Kicking Cancer in the Balls.
Excellent.
So
that was probably vying for potentially the title of the book as well.
Yeah, both of those. Not Up or Shut Up was already an Instagram handle when I created it. So I was like, I went with my second choice there. So both of those, follow my story, reach out to me on Instagram, get the book on Amazon as well. But just would be encouraged for you all to read it, because it does dive into the humor, the faith, the science of it, and hopefully provide you with a bit of a roadmap to get through this.
Yeah, it's a great book. I appreciate that you gave me a chance to read it ahead of time. So hasn't been published yet as of the day we're recording this, but it's an excellent read, and I think everybody would be able to take something away from reading that. So I'll make sure to have those links included here so guys can go find your book and connect with you on Instagram. And Mike, just really appreciate your time today. It's an important conversation. Thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate it again, Warren. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Have a good day.
All right. You too.